So here we go. And I apologize, everybody. I am very technologically challenged. So what exactly is a rock shrimp? Rock shrimp are similar in size and shape to the Penaeid soft shrimp. However, their distinguishing characteristic is their thick, rigid, stony shell. Their body is off-white to pinkish in color. They're really actually pretty. And they have darker blotches and barred lighter shades on their backs. They also have like little purple stripes on their legs. Their abdomen has deep grooves and short hairs cover their bodies. They're nearly impossible to peel the same way that you peel a soft shrimp. They're found from Norfolk, Virginia, south throughout the entire Gulf of Mexico, down to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. They live mainly on sand bottom in water 80 to 215 feet deep, although they've been found as deep as 600 feet. Rock shrimp are active at night and burrow in the sand during the daytime. The largest concentrations of rock shrimp are found inshore and offshore of the Acalina Bank off the east coast of Central Florida. So these rock shrimp are found, like I said, along the inshore and offshore sides of a really unique reef system offshore of eastern Florida. The Acalina Bank is named after the slow-growing ivory tree coral, Acalina verrucosa. It's a narrow strip of coral reefs located 15 to 30 miles off the east coast of Florida. Although Acalina coral can be found at a variety of depths all over the Caribbean and up the east coast of the United States, off of Florida, this species forms massive thickets at depths ranging from several meters to over 100 meters deep. This is the only place in the world where Acalina pinnacles and ridges rise from 10 to 30 meters above the ocean floor. These thickets support diverse communities of finfish and invertebrates, and consequently have been designated as essential fish habitat for many species of fish. Once plagued by World War II era bombings to destroy German U-boats that hid inside the reefs, fishing impacts, and episodic die-offs, this important ecosystem is now protected in federal waters of the United States South Atlantic Bight. Fishermen knew that the Acalina mounds were there, and the fishermen knew they were full of fish. They called them the steeples and the ice cream cones because on the old style paper stylus bottom machines, that's exactly what they look like, upside down ice cream cones. According to NOAA sources, scientists first discovered the Acalina coral reef in 1975. After finding the reef and observing the importance of its habitat, scientists requested that the Acalina reefs be protected from the developing trawl fishery, as well as from fish traps and longline fisheries. As a result, this unique coral reef ecosystem was first protected in 1984 and designated as the Acalina Bank Habitat Area of Particular Concern, shortened to HAPC. The original section was 23 nautical miles long and 4 nautical miles wide, which made it 92 square nautical miles, and it's located about 15 miles off the coast of Fort Pierce in Florida. Upon the discovery of additional Acalina coral mounds, the area was expanded in 2000 and again in 2015. All of these efforts came about from research trips, much like this voyage, where underwater remotely operated vehicles were used to observe the Acalina coral. The ROVs have cameras and they got little mechanical arms that can collect samples. In depths of 50 meters or greater, Acalina verrucosa lacks the symbiotic algae that gives corals their color and is part of their nutrition. Therefore, the color is white at these depths, and it relies solely on planktonic food. The thicket-like growth pattern of Acalina allows for a high biodiversity of mollusks and crustaceans. The Acalina Bank is extremely important spawning area for many economically important commercially and recreationally harvested fish. During early winter, grouper from the Carolinas come all the way down to East Florida every year to spawn in the Acalina Bank. After spawning, they move back north again. Populations of fish on the Akalina banks that were observed prior to significant fishing of the area were impressive. Gag, scamp, Warsaw groupers, snowy groupers, speckled hind, and amberjacks were abundant and quite large. The Akalina Bank Habsea is now more than 130 nautical miles long, stretching from Fort Pierce northward almost to St. Augustine, Florida. Bottom tending fishing gear, including trawling, fish traps, dredging, and anchoring, are prohibited in the area. The Akalina Bank Habsea and the Akalina Experimental Closed Area are rich in biological diversity and cultural history. The regulatory measures that are currently in place should aid in the protection of these important and fragile Akalina corals, as well as the variety of species that rely on them for habitat. So I'm getting a bit ahead of myself talking about the Akalina, but it's important that you guys know about the place where rock shrimp are found before we start talking about the history of fishing. Always ask how and not why is a philosophy that entrepreneur Rodney Thompson took to heart. My dad never questioned why an idea failed. He would always figure out a way to make the failure work. Amazingly, his journey into the seafood business began not on a shrimp trawler, but through his early experiments fabricating boats out of fiberglass. He started out racing plywood catamarans for Mercury outboards. The boats were so fragile, they exploded like a box of matches if you hit a wave wrong. Race boat drivers were among the first to utilize fiberglass, adding strength to their boats by covering the outside with fiberglass. That process morphed into the industry that we know today, where fiberglass molds are created and are used to cast finished boats. Back in the 1960s, my dad's T-Craft Boat Company was one of Florida's premier boat builders. At a time when conventional wisdom said that wood was the best material for the job, Dad began experimenting with fiberglass hulls. After he designed and constructed his own racing boat, he then applied what he learned to build recreational boats that were sold nationwide. Never being satisfied with the status quo, he moved on to bigger and grander dreams, and he built the Western Hemisphere's first fiberglass shrimp trawler, the R.C. Brent Jr., in 1968. When Dad started working on the mold for that 73-foot fiberglass shrimp boat, all of the shrimp boats were made of wood or steel. He was certain that shrimpers would embrace his new fiberglass hull, but the old-timers were not convinced. Everyone told him that his boat would sink. They said if God wanted shrimp boats to be made out of fiberglass, he would have made fiberglass trees. Dad could not find a buyer for his revolutionary vessel. To make ends meet, he switched hats from boat builder to fisherman and set out to prove the worthiness of his boat. But the how still eluded him, and he couldn't catch enough brown shrimp or white shrimp to turn a profit. One afternoon, Dad and his crew happened to pull into Port Canaveral empty-handed once again. They tied up right next to the research vessel Oregon II that was skippered by Captain Barrett. Captain Barrett looked at our trawler's empty nets and asked, "Do you want to make $1 million, Rodney? I'll show you how." The very next day, Dad and his crew followed the Oregon II to a location 20 miles off the coast of Melbourne, where they caught over 1,000 pounds of hard-shelled shrimp that the shrimpers called peanuts. They also called them hardheads and trash because they shoveled thousands of pounds of rock shrimp over the side every night as they culled through them to pick out a few hundred pounds of desirable soft shrimp called hoppers. Captain Barrett told Rodney, "If you can figure out how to sell those peanuts, you'll be a millionaire." My dad knew that Captain Barrett was right. He just had to figure out how. He started bringing home cans full of rock shrimp from his fishing trips. He started sending truckloads of rock shrimp up to New York's Fulton Fish Market. All he got in return were bills for taking his rock shrimp to the dump. Nobody could figure out what to do with them. It was too hard to get past their hard shells and reach their sweet meat, which everyone proclaimed tasted like lobster. This was the original rock shrimp processing crew. That's my mom, and that's me in the cowboy hat, my sister Sherry with the dog, and my brothers Tim and Tom. Our house was the neighborhood hangout for the neighborhood kids. We had 2 acres of yard with horses, chickens, and a goat. And inside the house, we had a pool table and a regulation pinball machine that my dad got from the Greyhound bus station before it was torn down. He took the coin mechanism out of it so we could play pinball for hours. When he would come home from a fishing trip, he brought cans of rock shrimp and he would set them right in the middle of Mom's kitchen. We had to stop whatever fun things we were doing at the time and go into the kitchen and dream up ways to cook rock shrimp. All of our methodologies consisted of throwing the rock shrimp into a pot of boiling water and then trying to peel them. And another problem was this. Rock shrimp have a gigantic sand vein. They must be like little miniature vacuum cleaners rooting around on the bottom, eating sand and pooping it out. So if you don't get that sand vein out, eating the rock shrimp, it's like chewing a mouthful of beach sand. So one Sunday afternoon in October in 1970, a light bulb went off in my head and I had this brilliant idea. I said, if rock shrimp tastes like a lobster, what would happen if we cooked them like a lobster? I got a steak knife and I sawed a few rock shrimp down their stomachs and split them open just like a lobster. And there was that evil sand vein sitting right on top of the meat. I could just pick it off with my finger. So we all looked at these opened up rock shrimp and imagined the possibilities. Mom melted some butter, poured it on the rock shrimp, and we stuck them in her oven to broil them. And I'll never forget that scene. I'm sure my mom remembers it, and my sister. There was Mom and Dad looking through the top of the broiler oven through the crack, watching the shrimp cook, and all the kids were like looking through the sides of the oven. And we watched those shrimp, watched the meat turn from opaque to nice and white, and their little tails curled up and burned on the end, just like lobsters. And when we pulled them out, we looked at them, we knew that was the way to cook rock shrimp. And when we ate them, it was definitely for sure, they tasted just like lobsters. So Dad and I, we cleaned a whole bunch of rock shrimp really fast. And then Dad and I jumped in his truck and we went to Miss Ella's barbecue bar and grill on the north end of town because Dad knew that Miss Ella had a big commercial broiler in her kitchen. And so that was the first commercial setting for rock shrimp. We cooked our rock shrimp and we served them to the men that were sitting around the bar watching the World Series on TV. And Miss Ella loved the rock shrimp because the more that the guys ate, the more beer they ordered. Of course, they loved them too. And so we ended up, our rock shrimp, it was born in a bar and grill. And that was the market that we created. So we only thought that our lives were miserable prior to that point because we had to stop playing and go clean rock shrimp every time Dad came back from fishing. But the rock shrimp, they turn black, even if they're on ice. After a couple of days, they will turn black because their porous shells collect bacteria from the bottom and it makes them turn black. So Dad went out and he bought a chest freezer and he stuck it in Mom's laundry room so that he could freeze the rock shrimp so that this packing crew could work every day after school. So Mom was running a rock shrimp processing operation in her kitchen. Some of the kids would be sitting there with a steak knife sawing them open, and a couple more kids would be over standing on buckets by the sink, rinsing off the shrimp and getting the sand vein out. A couple more kids would be packing them in 4-pound boxes. You had to line them up head to tail, and put wax paper in between the layers. I had the best job of all because I got to deliver the rock shrimp to all the bar and grills that were lined the shoreline of the Indian River. That's where we sold our shrimp. The first restaurateur, the first real restaurateur that actually bought rock shrimp and served them in his restaurant was Bill Mayfield. He had a really beautiful restaurant in Rockledge. It's gone now, was called the Neptune. Anybody from this area that's been here a long time will remember the Neptune. That was the first restaurant where rock shrimp was served, broiled, split, and clean. It didn't take long until the neighborhood kids working in Mom's kitchen couldn't keep up with the demand for split and clean rock shrimp. Dad got a lease down at Port Canaveral and built a building in which to process rock shrimp, and he hired real grown-ups to take over the processing. He called it Ponce Seafoods. He designed a crude machine to split the rock shrimp using a saw blade that he ground the teeth off of, a pulley that he made in the machine shop at the boat plant, a sewing machine motor for power, and vacuum cleaner belts to drive the pulley. Everybody thought that his machine cleaned the shrimp, but that was still done by hand. Rock shrimp are terribly labor intensive. All this machine did was take away the steak knives and would mechanically split the shrimp down the middle. Needing a larger supply of rock shrimp, my dad visited some fish houses around the state and learned about a well-respected family of shrimpers from Tampa. Mom and Dad drove over to the docks in Tampa just as Captain Sam Bona was arriving from a shrimping trip in the Honduras. Captain Sam had four sons, three of which also ran shrimp boats. They were Sammy Jr., Ronnie, and Michael. His son-in-law, Joe Shipley, also ran a shrimp boat, and his daughter, Sissy, helped to support their family's fishing operation. My dad convinced Captain Sam that there really was a future in rock shrimping, and Captain Sam and Sammy Jr. brought their boats over to the East Coast to fish for rock shrimp for my dad. Business was so good that Captain Sam brought more boats over from the Gulf. So these were the original boats that fished for the rock shrimp and then started the industry for my dad in the 1970s and 1980s. Some of the boats were owned by Captain Sam or family members, and some of them were owned by others, but Captain Sam managed the fleet for my dad. The Bonas called it the bathtub fleet, as all of the boats were all small shrimp boats that were 60 to 70 feet long. They were ice boats. They didn't have freezer boats back then. They were ice boats, and they could only stay out 3 days, or else their rock shrimp in their holds would turn black. So this is one of Captain Sam's crews standing next to a huge pile of rock shrimp. These guys were all from the Honduras. So things were going really well at our family's boat plant operation at the same time. We had 3 boat plants that produced 16 footers all the way up to 86 feet. We had 2 restaurants and the rock shrimp processing plant at the port. Twice, Dad had built the largest fiberglass boat in the world, and then others built bigger boats. So in 1979, he embarked again on the quest to build the world's largest fiberglass boat, and he began the tooling on a massive 90-foot commercial boat. And that's my dad standing next to the plug. No, that's the mold for the 90-footer. And that was the day that we pulled the mold off of the plug. So what you do when you build a fiberglass mold, you actually build a boat, and it's upside down, and you sand it and you get it really, really shiny, and then you put the fiberglass on top of it, and that's what you make your mold out of. So the mold had already been pulled and shoved into the building, and here they are turning over the plug. The cranes dropped that plug while they were trying to pick it up, and it didn't crack the boat itself, but it put a big dent in the asphalt. So as I said, we had boat plants, we had restaurants, things were going well, we're building the 90-footer, but then the economy took a really bad downturn when it was like we'd already gone through the gas embargo in the 1970s, the big fuel shortage, and then by the end of the 1970s, the prime interest lending rate started skyrocketing, and it went up over 20%. So Dad had 2 years worth of boats on order at that time, but as soon as the prime rate hit 20%, all of the captains called up and they canceled their orders. They say, Captain Rodney, we can't catch enough shrimp or fish to pay the interest on a 20% loan. And so all of the orders got canceled, but Dad kept on going on the 90-footer. So he ended up, everything cascaded and kind of fell in on us, and we ended up pretty much losing everything. Dad kept his house and his car and purchased the last 65-footer that was built while he still owned the boat plant. We named it the Mary Jean after my mom, and I went fishing. And so I was sending checks home from around the Gulf of Mexico and the South Atlantic, and that kept the family going while they built a seafood restaurant. My dad and mom wanted to start out small. The boat plants and all of that, we had over 150 employees, probably closer to 200, and it was big and it was massive. And so when they started over, they wanted to start out with just a little small restaurant that mom and dad could run by themselves, along with a few trusted people that came from the boat plant. And there I am, sitting on 40,000 pounds of grouper, 140 miles off of Fort Myers. So they started out with Dixie Crossroads with a dining room and a small restaurant. It only seated 30 people. So this is the original dining room. On the left-hand side where that glass brick wall is, there were glass fish cases that you look through into the kitchen, and you could see people cooking your food. People would pick out a fish in the fish case, and Dad would clean it for them and cook it for them. And we had paper plates and plastic forks and spoons. And that's when it took a while to get the restaurant going. In fact, they would call me on the single sideband pretty much every night at 11 o'clock. That was like the best time, that you could get through, because like I was 140 miles offshore. There was no such thing as satellite radios back then, or satellite navigation. We were on, when I started, I was on Loran A, then we switched to Loran C, but they tried to call me as often as they could. And I would hear their struggles of how they were trying to get the restaurant started. So when they first, my dad, he didn't want to ask for help from anybody. And so he started out selling product from the Indian River, like mullet, sea trout, oysters and blue crabs and things that he could get out of the Indian River Lagoon. And he didn't sell rock shrimp because he didn't have a way to get it anymore. And so one day Captain Sam was still fishing for rock shrimp because my dad's partners, Walt Johnson and Ed Schumers, they ended up getting Ponce Seafood. So they were still down at Port Canaveral cranking out rock shrimp, and Captain Sam was fishing for them. And they were also sending a lot of fish over to the Gulf too, peelers in the Gulf. So Captain Sam came and got my dad, and he said, "Rodney, we're going to take a trip down to the port. Hop in my truck." So Captain Sam took Dad down to his operation down at Port Canaveral, and they went in the building, and Captain Sam handed the key to a chest freezer to my dad, and he said, "This is your key, Rodney. I want you to start serving rock shrimp at Dixie Crossroads, because when you sold it at Sandpoint, you really built up a big business, and you need to have rock shrimp. You're not going to make it at the restaurant if you don't have rock shrimp." And so he said, "I'm going to count the bags that are in the freezer, and I'll keep track of it, and you don't have to pay me anything until you get the restaurant going, and you can get all the shrimp you want. These are your shrimp. Please, please, please start serving rock shrimp at Dixie Crossroads." And so they did. They were splitting rock shrimp in the kitchen. My mom was running a splitter, and everything was being done by hand. But when they put rock shrimp on the menu, that's when the business took off. Because I remember, when they called me the first $3,000 day they called me on the single sideband, and they were so excited. And so that's when it took off. And then we started adding dining rooms, because we would have like a 3-hour wait. Everybody wanted to come get rock shrimp, and it really took off. So we added a bunch of dining rooms, and the restaurant slowly became what it is today. So yeah, we've been blessed, really blessed. But rock shrimp is the thing that really made the restaurant famous. So how do you catch rock shrimp? If you look at this diagram, you can see that the shrimp boat's towing 2 nets. They have those brown things. Let me see. Those brown things that I'm pointing to, hopefully you can see my mouse moving around. Those are called doors. And then you have like a float line at the top that helps open up the top of the net and hold the throat of the net. This is called the throat of the net right here. There's a chain, which I'm pointing to now, called a tickler chain that drags on the bottom. And what happens is the shrimp are like hanging out on the bottom. And when the tickle chain touches them, they jump up in the air and they get swept into the throat of the net and push back towards the cod end of the net. This end of the net is called the cod end. There, here you can see where the turtle excluder device is right here. And behind that is a bycatch reduction device. So the turtle excluder device, it will eject turtles out of the net, and also stingrays and sharks and anything big that runs into the bars of the turtle excluder gets shot out of the top of the net. The bycatch reduction device, that helps eliminate catching finfish and stuff. So with these 2 devices, the catches end up being pretty clean and not a lot of bycatch. So this is a close-up of how the turtle excluder device works. You can see the turtle would come into this end of the net and it would hit that set of bars and it just shoots it right out of the top of the net. So this is a live picture of a sea turtle being ejected out of the hole in the top of the net. There's like a little flap of webbing that will cover it back up again once the turtle goes out. Uh-oh. Crying out loud.
Everything okay?
No, it won't advance again. What is going on? It is not cooperating.
Try enter or forward button.
Nothing. I guess
All
you'd
right.
have to kick me off again.
Well, let me try to take back presentation. Give me just 1 second.
Okay. Sorry, folks.
All right, see if you can adjust your PowerPoint now.
I can't get to it.
Hit Control Alt Delete.
Okay. Control Alt. All right, it turned into a blue screen.
Right, and then close the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. So hit cancel.
On PowerPoint, yes.
I don't see anything that indicates it's on PowerPoint. It just has a blue screen and it says cancel, lock, switch user, sign out, task manager.
Go to Task Manager.
Okay.
And now are you getting a list of programs that are open?
I got Microsoft PowerPoint. Okay. So
Close that.
click on that in
Yep.
task. Okay.
Yep. Close.
All right.
Did it close it by chance?
No.
Not yet.
Yeah, all I have is a webinar. I can't see my PowerPoint. Oh, wait a minute. Let me try clicking on this snowflake and see what happens. No, that just went back to webinar launcher. I
Okay.
don't think my PowerPoint is on right now.
All right, then go click on the PowerPoint icon at the bottom of your screen.
I don't have a PowerPoint icon at the bottom of my screen.
Oh, well, go ahead and start PowerPoint then, if it's not open.
I'm sorry, but I don't know how to. My PowerPoint icon is totally gone, and I can't. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait. Maybe I can hear. Okay, let me try this. Apologize, folks. Let's see. Shrimp boats, where are you?
So are you able to advance now?
I'm trying to get it pulled up.
Okay.
All right, so now I put it back into PowerPoint, right?
Yeah, don't do presenter mode. Let me send it to you first, and then you'll make it into presenter mode after you have become presenter.
Okay.
All right, it's coming to you.
All right, show my screen.
Yep, I see. Thank you.
Oh, that's the wrong PowerPoint presentation. All right, bear with me.
All right, we're seeing the other PowerPoint right now.
Okay, so
if you go to the left, you'll see your slides over there, and there's a scroll down bar to right to the left of that first picture. Down some. Yep, to the right of that first picture there. Go down a little bit. Yep, to the right of there, you can scroll down to where you were.
Right here.
Yep. And now you can click on that. Yep.
Cross your fingers. Oh yeah. Okay. So this is a really, really nice picture of overhead shot of the shrimp boat. So you can see these are the doors that are hanging from the end of the outriggers right here. And there's the floats, the tickle chain is like right here. And what happens is when they'll undo the winch and they'll let go of these doors, and the doors will drop down, and as soon as they hit the water, they shoot off to the sides and they open up the throat of the net. These guys have just dumped this tail bag. So what they've done is they've grabbed the lazy line with a hook, and you can see the lazy line here. They'll wrap that around the cat head on the winch, which is right here, and they'll hoist that tail bag way up in the rigging, and then pull ropes on the bottom of it, and that dumps the catch out on the deck. And then once they've dumped the catch, they'll tie the bottom of the bag back together again and throw it back out in the ocean, and it'll be like trailing along behind the boat. Once they've got both tail bags dumped, then they will let them go. Now they also have a tri-net. So there's a tri-net hanging from a block right here, and they use that tri-net. It's like a little tiny net. It's only about 15 feet, and they'll tow it for like 15 or 20 minutes, and they'll pull it in, and they'll count how many shrimp they caught per minute, and that tells them whether they're in a good area or not. And if they aren't catching very many shrimp in their tri-net, then they'll move to a different spot. But that's how that all works. And oh, for God's sake, it stopped again.
Click on the boat again.
Oh, okay.
And to the bottom right, there you go.
Yeah, oh, okay. It must be something I'm doing with my mouse. All right, so here's a video of the guy dumping the tail bag. So that's pretty much clean rock shrimp that you're seeing there. So you see how he's jerking on those ropes, and it opens up the bottom of the net, and it dumps the shrimp out on the deck. And you can see there is not a lot of bycatch in that. Before the birds, there would have been like all kinds of stuff mixed in with the shrimp. But with the bycatch reduction devices, they pretty much catch a clean catch now. And that's what it looks like after they've picked out all the little fish and starfish and stuff and thrown them back overboard. And so they put the shrimp in onion sacks, great big onion sacks. And each one of those sacks weighs 60 to 70 pounds. And they'll lay them out on the deck and rinse the shrimp off with the deck hose. So you'll see him stick a deck hose on that back. He's washing off the mud off those rock shrimp. And then they pack them in the freezer. These are all freezer boats. So those videos, they came courtesy of Marilyn Solozano. That's another family that when the rock shrimp season is going on, if they're down fishing off the Cape, they'll unload with us. Marilyn has 3 sons that all run shrimp boats, and her husband also runs a shrimp boat. And Marilyn used to go out shrimping too, but now she's a grandma and she enjoys staying home and hanging out with her grandkids and her family. But she was just down at the port last week, you know. Great family once again. This is the Band of Gold. So this is a 97 footer. He puts on usually about 50,000 gallons of fuel. He stays out 3 to 4 weeks at a time. Most of the big boats do now. They don't stay out for 3 days anymore. They stay out for 3 to 4 weeks. And so he just unloaded at our facility, the Wild Ocean Seafood Market at Port Canaveral a week ago. So I'm going to run you through what all happens. You know, as I said, rock shrimp are incredibly labor intensive. So they're handled by many, many people by the time they end up on a plate in a restaurant. So he's pulling the bags out of the hold. There's at least 1 or 2 guys down inside the fish hold, pulling bags and hooking them on the hook. Now that guy is unbelievable. Like I said, every one of those bags of shrimp weighs 60 to 70 pounds. And you'll see he is like throwing them high up in the air and slamming them down on that conveyor belt. And so they come up the conveyor belt, and there's 2 more guys loading them onto the pallet. That's my niece, Andrea. She's going to cut open a bag and take out a handful of shrimp so she can weigh them and see what the count is. The shrimp are they're priced by how much, you know, what size they are. So there's like 3640s and 4050s and 1618s. And so the bigger the shrimp are, the more money they're worth. So as they unload, they're constantly getting a count on the shrimp to make sure that, you know, they're keeping track of what size they are. So this is how, and this operation is nonstop, and it goes on for hours. Sometimes these boats will have 100,000 pounds on them. So this guy's setting up a new pallet. They're getting ready, and they start piling bags up on the new pallet. And there's Andrea. She's counting the shrimp, throwing them in 2 at a time, and she will count the shrimp and see how many are in the pound and write that. She'll write it down. Here comes Mike with the forklift. And so eventually the rock shrimp, some of them will end up at Dixie Crossroads Seafood Restaurant. So this is an advanced model of the original rock shrimp machine that my dad made 50 years ago, which was very, very primitive. This machine, it's like, I think the 3rd rendition now. It's got rubber rollers that will expand and contract based on the size of the shrimp. The old machine, it would only cut one size of shrimp. The blade was not movable. It didn't have those fancy rubber rollers that would wrap themselves around the side of the shrimp. This machine was designed by a retired NASA engineer from the Space Center. So it's got all kinds of tolerances in it and springs, and it will go up and down. And instead of cutting all the little shrimp in half like the old machine that didn't have moving parts, This one will accommodate multiple sizes of shrimp. And that's what they look like after they're cooked. This is pure rock shrimp with nothing but butter squirted on them. Some people like to put seasoning on them. This is rock shrimp with Old Bay. And you can't talk about the rock shrimp industry and the Akalina Bank without also talking about the calico scallop industry. They went in tandem. Actually, the calico scallop industry started before the rock shrimp industry. And you can see the three main areas where the scallop beds were. And I say were because they're not there anymore. This bed here got fished out, if I remember right, in the 1980s. This was where they first started fishing for calico scallops. In Wanchese, North Carolina, there was a bunch of scallop processors. And after they fished this bed of scallops out, they came down the coast and they discovered the big beds off of Cape Canaveral. In fact, when the Oregon 2 was there, and my dad, talked to the captain, and he convinced Dad to go out and try to catch rock shrimp. The Oregon 2 was actually there doing research on the calico scallops, and the boat was brand new then. I think it was only a year or two old. It didn't even belong to NOAA yet. It belonged to the United States Fish, and I forget the name, but it wasn't a NOAA boat. It didn't get commissioned by NOAA until about 10 years later. But you can see the beautiful, beautiful patterns on these scallop shells. I used to love digging through the piles and picking out all the different, because there was other shells too. There was like gigantic horse conchs and helmet shells and all kinds of olive shells and tulip shells and all kinds of really neat shells mixed in with them. But this is what the meat looks like. So this is the viscera, and this is where the eyes of the scallops are, and all of that gets cut out, and they only save this part right here, just the muscle of the scallop, and that's what they're after. And that's what they look like. They would deck load the scallops onto the deck and haul them back to shore as quickly as they could to get processed on shore. So there's a deck load of scallops in an old photograph. This is a boat coming into Port Canaveral, and you can see how low it's sitting in the stern and how high the bow is out of the water. These guys turned over all the time in the port, and it seemed like there was always somebody's scallop boat rolling over as they were coming into the port, because they would race each other. These guys are actually racing each other. They just came through the jetty, and they are trying to get to the dock first, because it took hours to unload one of these boats, and everybody wanted to get off the boat, and whoever got to the dock first, they got unloaded first, and everybody else had to wait. So they would turn over the scallop boats inside the jetty, along the dock. They would roll them over at the dock. Sometimes, if a big boat came by with a large wake, it was enough to upset one of these boats that was tied off, to 4 other boats, and roll it over, literally sitting at the dock. This is an old picture of the boats at Wanchese, and this is how they unloaded. There were scallop processors at Port Canaveral. Bill Lambert had the biggest one, and in fact, that's where our Wild Ocean Market property is now, was where Bill Lambert's scallop plant was. So some of the scallop boats unloaded directly into processors at the port, and some of them got trucked back up to Wanchese. So they would they used a big cherry picker, with a big bucket, and they just pick the scallops off of the back deck of the boat. They would either put them onto a belt that took them inside the scallop processing plant, or they would throw them into the back of a semi, one or the other. If they went into a semi, they went back up to Wanchese to get processed in North Carolina. So this is what happened to the calico scallops. Scallops are they are free swimming when they hatch. So like when the scallop, it'll spew its spat out into the water, and they swim around, and they have to get attached. They have to attach to some kind of substrate or to another scallop shell or something hard very, very quickly. Otherwise, they get swept away in the Gulf Stream. These things are found right on the western side edge of the Gulf Stream. So if they don't get attached to something pretty quickly, they're gone. They're heading north in the Gulf Stream. So the scalloping first started, in the 1960s and then in the 1970s. And then a whole bunch of boats from the Gulf came over because they've heard about the big bonanza going on the east coast of Florida with the landings. And so the scallop peaked in 1984, like over 40 million pounds of scallops that were unloaded. But by then they had decimated the beds. So what they did is they brought the scallop shells to land and they processed them, and then they hauled them away in dump trucks. And they built dirt roads out of them, and they used them for fill, and they did everything except return those empty scallop shells back out and dump them back onto the beds. They literally drug 10 feet of ocean bottom out of the area where the scallops were and brought it to land, and it never got taken back out to sea. So without, by the time they got, it was getting near the end, they were catching like 90% dead shells. So they brought the dead shells into shore to pick that 10% of live scallops out of them, and they wiped out the scallop beds. They wiped them out off of North Carolina first, they wiped them out in the Gulf second, and then they wiped them out here. And they've never come back. We have, like, every once in a while, we'll have like a little spurt and somebody will get excited and they'll think, oh, the scallops are coming back, but they've never stuck around. So that's what happened to the calico scallop industry. And then the rock shrimp industry, these pictures are, this is a Latrum shrimp peeling machine, and you can see it is a massive piece of machinery. It's got a lot of moving parts to it. There's several tanks that the shrimp go into. There's a lot of water. There's a lot of water being dumped on these shrimp here. When their shrimp are coming over, they come up a conveyor and onto these belts, and these are rollers. These are oscillating rollers. So they're like spinning and rolling against each other, and they actually pinch the shrimp, and they keep pinching the shrimp and pinching the shrimp, and the shrimp are rolling around, and the water's washing them down the belt, and they end up down here. And by the time they get down close to the bottom, all of that pinching motion has caused the shell to separate from the meat, and eventually it will rip, and the shell will fall down into a basket that's below these rollers right here, and the clean meat will fall down right here on this conveyor belt. So these are clean meats. They're getting washed. It uses a lot of water, and it washes a lot of the flavor out of the shrimp. So that's the mechanical process that was being used for cleaning soft shrimp. So these machines did not work on rock shrimp. And so in like 1984, Warren and David Gaucher from Pascagoula, Mississippi, they had a company called Pascagoula Ice and Freezer Company. They figured out how to modify a Latrum machine so that it would peel rock shrimp. And they did it by increasing the size of the rollers and putting heavy sandpaper, gluing heavy sandpaper on the rollers so it could grab the shells of the rock shrimp. And so they were able to mechanically peel and devein rock shrimp. Well, that's when the rock shrimp industry really took off, because now you have peelers, from North Florida, and in every Gulf state, there were peelers that they wanted rock shrimp because rock shrimp were so cheap. When we first started fishing rock shrimp, they were worth like $0.25 a pound. And so they could buy rock shrimp for much, much less than they could for soft shrimp. And so they built a huge market for peeled and deveined rock shrimp meats that were being used in soups and stir-fry dishes and different dishes in restaurants and grocery stores. Huge market, huge demand for peeled and deveined rock shrimp meats. Meanwhile, we're still splitting them, basically by hand and cracking them open in our restaurant. But after that happened, after the peelers started up operations peeling rock shrimp, then the big boats, I mean giant boats, 110 footers came over from the Gulf. And these boats, like our boats were towing 2 nets. These 110 footers, we call them slabs, that came over from the Gulf of Mexico. They could tow 4 nets, 2 from each outrigger. And they would do, like I said, 100,000-pound trips. And there were many, many boats that were fishing. So this is landings. And you can see there's a calico scallop column right here. And then there's a rock shrimp column. So you can clearly see that the calico scallop industry, it actually started in 1959. That was the first recorded landings of calico scallops, 6,500 pounds that year. And then they were bounced around. You know, sometimes they had over 1 million pounds, but usually it was several 100,000 pounds. And that went on until 1979. Now, you see that there's like 5 million pounds of rock shrimp that showed up in the rock shrimp column in 1979. Actually, the first recorded catch of rock shrimp was in 1972, and it was like 1,200 pounds. But the rock shrimp catches were so small, there's really not much, obviously no record of them in National Marine Fisheries Service records. But you know, during the 1970s, we were poking along. In fact, we already had a pretty good market going, and Dad had built the rock shrimp processing plant at the port, and everything was going really, really good. And Captain Sam was bringing his boats over. And in 1973, the rock shrimp totally disappeared. And I mean, totally. Well, they didn't disappear completely, but there was not enough rock shrimp to make it economically feasible to run rock shrimp trips out of the port. And I found it interesting. I found a report by a guy named Kennedy, and he was doing his research on rock shrimp in like 1974, 75 timeframe, right at the time where they had disappeared to such an extent that it wasn't worthwhile fishing on them. So, and that was the only research that was done that I could find on the rock shrimp industry. It is the report that National Marine Fisheries Service bases their rock shrimp amendments on, and their information, and they're basing all of that on a report that was done when there weren't even enough rock shrimp out there to make it economically feasible to fish for them. So I wonder what would have happened had Mr. Kennedy come back and done a subsequent research, or had his research taken place, you know, instead of in the 1970s, had he done his research in the 1980s. When you see these kind of numbers here, these 2 stars represent the height of the landings. In 1984, you had 42,700,000 pounds of calico scallops that were offloaded, most of them in the state of Florida. And 12 years later, in 1996, you had the zenith of the rock shrimp industry. So this figure here, this 22 million pounds, a lot of that had to do with when the scallops, as you can see, it crashed. I mean, it went down like a rocket, and there weren't even any landings some years. So a lot of the scallop boats switched over and got and started fishing for rock shrimp. So you see how these rock shrimp numbers are pretty consistently pretty good, you know, until, and then you had the scallop boats switching over to rock shrimp. And then you also had this influx of Gulf boats that came over from the Gulf of Mexico. So our biggest year for rock shrimp landings was 22 million pounds. Again, most of that was unloaded on the east coast of Florida. And then after that, the rock shrimping kind of went down too. We had good years and bad years. You know, pretty good up until 2001, and then it got actually 2004, and then it got kind of scary after that. You can see these are all mostly single-digit figures for a long time, until last year. We had the biggest rock shrimp year that we've had since 2004. So it's been a long time since we had a year that good, almost 20 years. So this is pretty interesting when you look at it. because it really tells the story of the two industries. But the rock shrimp, it is sustainable, and it has kept going. So here's a graph that shows here was when they had the 22 million pounds, and it fell off sharply after that. A few more good catches, and then it really fell off until 2022. And here's your average catch by state. You can see the majority of shrimp are landed in Florida, because that's the Gulf of Mexico. That's the Gulf side of Florida, and this is the Atlantic side. So Florida pretty much rules when it comes to rock shrimp. So during this time, I had been encouraging my dad, first from a single sideband radio 140 miles off the Gulf Coast, saying, Dad, you got to do something, because the calico scallopers, as they had wiped out the scallop beds, they started getting desperate. And the way that the mounds are, there's spaces in between some of the pinnacles. And so these guys were going in with these big dredges, and they were trying to drag around in between the Acolina Reef pinnacles to find little pockets of calico scallops that remained because of the shelter of the reef. And they ended up damaging a lot of the coral. And then when the Gulf rock shrimpers came over, they followed the scallopers into those trails that they had made through the Acolina Reef. And that's how rock shrimpers got a bad name for fishing in the reef. Our boats, our local boats, they never fished in the reef, because they understood that the coral was important to the rock shrimp. But I was like saying, Dad, if you want to have rock shrimp to sell at your restaurant, you got to do something to help protect the reef. And so I kept bugging him. And then finally, in the early 1990s, he started going to the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council meetings and inquiring and asking about something to be done about stopping the boats from fishing inside the reef. Now, it is intimidating. I know, because I've done it many times. It is scary to sit there and try to give public testimony, to a bunch of fishery management council members, that are sitting there, trying to focus on what you're saying, but it's really, really scary. It's really intimidating. And my dad, not only was it intimidating talking to the council, however, they were supportive. They knew that something had to be done to help protect the reef too. But the people from the rock shrimp industry, they were not happy. They were not happy with Dad, and he risked alienating his associations by going up and saying that they needed to have closures and maybe even restrict the number of boats that were in the rock shrimp fishery to try to make the fishery sustainable. And so my dad and mom went through many years of not being comfortable around some of their best friends in the industry. My mom even said sometimes she was scared to go to the bathroom because she was afraid somebody would say something to her in the bathroom. But they persevered, and eventually we ended up with a lot of regulations that affected the rock shrimp industry. So let me explain this map over here. Down here at the bottom is the original habitat area of particular concern that was established in 1984. That was the very first thing. It's actually down below this area. So this is more up on the northern end. You can see these red lines. This was the, when was this put in? Okay, this was put in during Coral Amendment 4, these red lines right here. And so Coral Amendment 4 increased the 92 square miles up to 300, up to a bigger area. Yeah, 300 square miles to protect the coral. But you can see they missed the coral. It was offshore of the coral. All these little squiggly lines right here, that's the coral pinnacles. And they only managed to get two little they called these satellites, two little satellites that actually included the coral. So they made it illegal to trawl way out here. Well, these yellow lines right here, these represent where the boats were dragging when the rock shrimp move offshore. So the rock shrimp, they usually start out on the inshore side of the reef. So these light green lines, these are actually shrimp boat trawl tracks. And so you can see they are actually inside on the inshore side of the coral pinnacles. Over time, and it depends on what the Gulf Stream is doing, if the Gulf Stream shifts and it shifts further offshore, then the shrimp will move to the offshore side of the reef, and they do that later in the year. So once the shrimp move over to the offshore side of the reef, then the boats drag right on this roll down right here. And they really like fishing in that area because this is a 60-mile run. They could drag for 60 miles in a straight line and not have to worry about trying to turn the boat around. So they're fishing in a lot of tide usually, and it's really hard to get the boat turned around without crossing your nets over each other, and it can get real messy and ugly. So they loved being able to have the capability of dragging for 60 miles straight up and down this shelf right here. Well, that got eliminated in 1996 when Shrimp Fishery Amendment 1 added rock shrimp to the management unit and established this bigger area. So, and then in 2015, Coral Amendment 8 moved the western boundary. So this blue line right here, this is what happened in 2015, and is that 2015? Yeah, and so that got added. So they finally, 30 years after they did the original 1984 small closure, it took them 30 years to finally get the coral totally protected, as a habitat area of particular concern. And then other amendments went into place too as these different protections were put in place. So you had vessel monitoring systems, VMSs. Those were regulations passed to ensure that the coral would always, be protected. They could track the rock shrimp boats and make sure they didn't stray into the coral, because they had vessel monitoring systems that are monitored by satellite, so that I think it's Woods Hole that monitors where the VMSs are pinging from, and that way they know, they have actual evidence. If a boat goes in and drags through the coral, they can tell if it's dragging just by the speed that it runs. So if it's running, it's going to ping faster and further apart than it does if it's dragging at like 3 or 4 knots. They can tell the difference. And so they also put in different limited access permits, and they reduced the size of the fleet to like 150 boats. Now I think about 103 boats still maintain active rock shrimp permits, but the size of the fleet has gone down as the protections went up. And so this will show you, this is like the southern end of the HAPC. This, it's kind of hard to see, but right here, this box right here, this was the original habitat area of particular concern that was put in place in 1984. And you can see it doesn't have a whole lot of coral pinnacles in it except up here at the top, but it absolutely eliminated this offshore fishery on the roll down. And you can see right here where this blue circle is, you see all these green lines that run right up to the bottom of that box. That shows you how much fishing was actually going on that roll down that the shrimpers lost access to in 1996. And this is what the Akalina Bank habitat area of particular concern looks like now. So all of the stuff that I just showed you, that was basically this area right here. This area was added in 2015. to extend the protected area almost up to St. Augustine. So it basically goes from Fort Pierce down here all the way up to St. Augustine. So all of the Aquiline Reef is now protected by government regulations. And we're okay with it because we have a sustainable fishery now. It's not like the calico scallop industry where they wrecked it and it never came back. It's actually seems to be, you know, getting better. So there's challenges that were faced in the industry, and especially at Port Canaveral. One of the biggest challenges is loss of infrastructure to support the industry. And you can see why at Port Canaveral in the background there. You see those gigantic cruise ships, and they just keep adding more and more cruise ships every year. This is our dock at Wild Ocean Market. A gigantic cruise terminal for Disney is planned right on the other side of our dock. Right now, there's a gigantic dry stack storage facility there that's got hundreds of small boats in it. That is going to be torn down, and this big, huge terminal for Disney is going to be put there. So I don't know how many more days we have left at our little facility. It's pretty hard to buck the cruise ship industry. And then another thing, this wasn't even on the radar screen when it came to the port's land use plans 10 years ago. These are actually not being used anymore. These are really, really nice boats with these are nets. These boats were leased by Elon Musk from SpaceX to try to catch the fairings that cover up the satellites from when he launches a rocket, and then the fairings fall back to Earth, and they're very expensive. And he tried to position these ships underneath where these giant things were falling out of the sky and catch them in the nets. Well, that didn't work very well, but Elon's pretty smart. He figured out the fairings are kind of shaped like a bowl. So he put parachutes on them, parachutes that would deploy when they got close to Earth. And so the parachutes open up, and it turns the satellite fairings upside down, and they settle down in the water, and they float like a little boat until the tender boat can go pick them up. But Elon's not the only space business now that is asking for bulkhead at the port. There are multiple space businesses they want bulkhead at the port to park their ships. And here we are, our little shrimp boat operation, and Jimmy Bussey's Seafood Atlantic, you know, his finfish operation down the dock. We don't know what our future holds, because between the cruise ships and the space industry, there's a lot of demand for bulkhead at Port Canaveral. And so here's another challenge that we're seeing. This is parts from a rocket that has fallen out of the sky after a launch and landed right where we catch rock shrimp. And you can see these are big things. And when you catch them, you lose a night's fishing because they're caught in the net. The guys have to cut them out of the net. It's dangerous getting them actually on board so they can cut them out of the net, and they can't. They're too big to haul back to shore, so they throw them back in the ocean and catch them again. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff out there in our fishing grounds. That's a nice sunrise picture of some kind of it looks like it had a motor in it or something. It's like a fan blade or something. I don't know what it is, but it took them hours to cut that out of the net, and they lost 2/3 of their catch that went out of the hole that the thing made in the net. Here's some other interesting things. This one's actually sitting at our dock. This one is too. That one's still on the boat. That one's still on the boat. But these guys, you know, they've been catching stuff for a long, long time, but it seems to be increasing. And if it's falling where we fish for the rock shrimp, then it's a pretty good certainty that it's also falling inside the Aquiline Reef too. And here's a new one. I wasn't aware of this, but Captain Woody told me about this. This is monofilament tangled up in the nets. And he said that he catches it all the time. And it's from the sports fishermen that are out there fishing along the edge of the Gulf Stream for like pelagic fish, dolphins and tuna and marlin and stuff like that. And when they want to change their line, they're just like running it off their reel and dumping it in the ocean rather than putting it in a bucket and bringing it back to shore. Woody says that there is so much monofilament out there. He says you can probably walk around on it on the bottom out there. This is a big, huge problem. And here's another issue that we have. This is some kind of weird algae that started showing up around the south end of the Akalina Reef several years ago. We believe that it is caused from the sewage that's coming up from the south end of the state. So you off of Dade and Broward counties, you have partially treated sewage that's being discharged in pipes right next to the Gulf Stream. You know, millions of gallons every day of partially treated sewage is being dumped into the ocean. And then you have the Lake Okeechobee discharges, sometimes billions and billions and billions of gallons of polluted water coming out of Lake Okeechobee. It comes out of the inlet there at Stewart, where the Gulf Stream is pretty close to land, and it gets picked up. And they've actually tested the Gulf Stream off of Savannah, Georgia, and found traces of Lake Okeechobee junk water all the way up off of Georgia. We believe that the nutrients, you know, from those two sources are causing this algae to grow around the south end of the Akalina Reef. My boats won't even fish there anymore. They would catch so much of it that sometimes they couldn't even haul the tail bags up on deck. They had to bend over and slice their tail bags open with a knife to let this stuff out because they couldn't even pick up the tail bags. And there's very little life around the south end of the reef. So we're not scientists, but we believe that the southern end of the Akalina Reef is being impacted by this nutrient-laden water that's coming up from the south part of the state. That's what it looks like. It kind of looks like kelp a little bit. And a diver, one of the captains was showing a diver that dives down there a lot, showing him pictures of what they were catching. And the diver said, oh yeah, I recognize that. It grows all around the sewage outfalls off of Dade and Broward County. Same thing. So here's the other thing. Imports. Our domestic shrimp industry is in a disaster situation right now due to too many imports coming into the country. And the imports are being sold a lot cheaper than our domestic rock shrimp and soft shrimp. And a lot of the boats are tied to the dock. In fact, most of the boats in the Gulf of Mexico are literally tied to the dock. It's really, really sad because when you tie a boat to the dock, if you're not working the boat, it's deteriorating. So barnacles are growing on the bottom of it, the paint's peeling off, your electronics are sitting there not working. A lot of these guys are selling their electronics just trying to stay alive until the price of shrimp goes back up again. They're getting 85 cents a pound for shrimp that they've got like $3 a pound 5 years ago. It's horrible, and there's no relief in sight. So, you know, if we want to protect our domestic food supply, we really need to take a look at having some kind of a reasonable amount of imports that come into the country. I know that we can't supply all the restaurants and everything with our domestic product. It's a premium product, and you know there needs to be some imports, but last year they imported more shrimp than the Americans consume in a year. That's ridiculous. And the disappearance of the fleet, you know, all of these things are adding up. This is what the Port Canaveral commercial fleet looked like in 1987 when a hurricane was coming and they all came in and tied up at the same time. There were hundreds of boats. And then the bottom picture, that was a hurricane in 2017. So 30 years later, that's what the commercial fleet that was fishing out of Port Canaveral in the fall of 2017, they evacuate the port now. All the boats have to leave. That is the extent of the commercial fleet at Port Canaveral in 2017. It's tragic what's happening to America's commercial fishing industry. Imports and loss of supporting infrastructure, it's putting us out of business. And I'm gonna play this video from Captain Woody.
I've been fishing my whole life. This is my life. My boat started in '73. Made a good living. Sent all my youngest to college, 4,000. Now we can barely pay the cents to run the boat. I blame it on the import. Everything else. Never had a boat job in my life.
And so 5 generations of my family have made a living in some manner in the commercial fishing industry, operating a fishing pier, building boats, having restaurants, on and on. You were very proud supporters of the American commercial fishing industry. And we really need to do our best to try to keep that industry alive. You know, it's important to America's food security. We need to be able to feed ourselves. And this is my nephew, Josh, and his 2 nephews, Cayman and, well, my brain just died. Anyway, that's his 2 nephews, and Cayman and Kingston. And we want to keep our industry. We want Cayman and Kingston to be able to make a living commercial fishing too. So I see that I have used up my entire allotment of time. I apologize, but maybe Chip will let us hang around and you guys can ask me a few questions. Thank you very much. Bye.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. We were glad to hear all of it. Let me take back control. That way I can go over how to ask questions, and we can definitely stay on. All right, once again, you can type in a question into the question box. You can also click on the hand icon. If it's red, that means your hand is raised. Once you raise your hand and I recognize you, you'll hear the webinar unmute you. Then you'll need to click on this red microphone that looks like this. Once that turns green, that means you're ready to speak. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. There is one that was entered during the webinar. Is climate change impacting the Oculina reef and subsequently the rock shrimp population?
Okay, I don't know yet whether climate change is impacting the rock shrimp population, because they always show up every year almost in exactly the same place. But it has affected finfish populations. So our Spanish mackerel are moving more and more into northern waters. In fact, on the council, you know, we're trying to figure out how to co-manage the Spanish mackerel population with the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. There are groupers that are now showing up in off the waters of Virginia. And so there's a lot of finfish that are moving north. So climate change is going to have a serious impact on the locations of fish populations and the management strategies on how to keep their fisheries sustainable. And the other thing that might affect the rock shrimp would be the Gulf Stream, you know, because the location of the Gulf Stream and the speed of the Gulf Stream dictates what's going on with the rock shrimp. So the climate change will impact the speed of the Gulf Stream, and that could ultimately maybe impact rock shrimp. Thank you.
Christina has her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Laura Lee, for such a fascinating presentation on a really unique fishery. And you talked a lot about how sort of being involved in commercial fishing has a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And so as someone who's been a part of that community their entire life, I was just curious what you really find the most rewarding about working in the commercial fishing industry.
Well, I used to love to go out and try to catch as many fish as I could. You know, I was very competitive and I caught a lot more fish than most everybody else. I don't have that killer instinct anymore. So my most rewarding part right now is advocating for the commercial fishing industry. My sister Sherry and her partners Mike and Gina Merrifield, we make many trips to Washington, D.C. to speak to congressmen and senators about the value of America's commercial fishing industry and the need to ensure that we can remain viable, specifically our infrastructure. We've managed somehow to survive through the increase in regulations that have brought America's commercial fisheries back from the brink of horrible overfishing. But our fear is that once we get these fisheries brought back, the infrastructure that's necessary to support them, the truckers, the ice machines, the fuel trucks, all the things that support the bait and tackle shops, the gear makers, the boat manufacturers, they won't be there anymore to support the industry once it reaches the point where the quotas start getting increased and we can start producing more American seafood. That is our concern, is that the infrastructure to support the commercial fishing industry will be gone. It's evaporating now at a horrible rate. So that's my most that's the thing I like the best. My most self-fulfilling thing is advocating for the industry.
All right, we had two more online. One is a statement. She didn't have a question, but Jennifer wanted to say how much she enjoyed the presentation and how much she learned today from you, and to thank you for sharing. The second one is,
my pleasure.
It was a question from Tom, and what will impact an increased cost of what shrimpers call sell their product for in the upcoming years? Let me
say the question again, Chip.
What will impact an increased cost of what shrimpers sell their product in the upcoming years? For what shrimpers can sell their product for the
what will impact it?
Yes.
Imports. It's foreign imports, both farm raised and wild caught shrimp products from other countries. That is the limiting factor on the cost of shrimp right now, and will be in coming years, because shrimp is an annual crop. Royal Reds live 2 years, rock shrimp live up to 2 years, soft shrimp, most of them live 1 year. So it's an annual recurring crop that, as long as we don't ruin the habitat for the shrimp, they will come back every year. But what's going to limit the cost is going to be the supply of imported product.
Thank you. Alana has her hand raised.
Hey, Alana.
Hello. Lorelei, that was a great story. Like your life, I felt like I was listening to a podcast. You had just highs and lows, and then you got back high, and I feel like it has a really happy ending because your restaurant is so successful. But you definitely had to work to get there, and just what a great story. And I also did not realize, I thought the rock shrimp would be kind of protected from the struggles of the shrimp industry as a whole, because you were more of a luxury shrimp, I would think. But it's unfortunate that the imports are affecting even that. And in North Carolina, we're seeing that too. And it's like the boys will come home and they made $20 and they were gone for a week. And then they're going home to their family, you know, and telling them, well, I only made $20. I don't know how we're going to pay the rent. And so they're quitting. And then the fish houses have told everybody to tie their boats up, that they're not buying any shrimp. And I was talking to a friend of mine. He's got a buddy who has 300,000 pounds of head-on shrimp in the freezer, and he has no idea what to do with them. He's scared to death to thaw them out and start heading them, because then you're just sitting on them. But it really, I feel like it's something that's out of the council control to market domestic shrimp. But anyways, it's just really sad to see where the shrimp industry has come. And then the scallop industry as well. And what you talk about, the deterioration of the infrastructure, we saw that in North Carolina. We had our first calico scallop season since I think 2009, and down in Cape Lookout, but all the infrastructure had eroded and there was nobody who would process them like on a large scale. So all the shuckers had quit and nobody came up shucking, so nobody knew how to do it. And the demand really wasn't there anymore. So it is really sad, and it's kind of hindsight. I call it historical hindsight. So it's great that you're sharing your story and that we can refer back to it. So I want to thank you again for that.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words, Alana. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Let's go ahead and raise your hand. All right, I am not seeing any other questions. Once again, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, Laura Lee. It was great to hear about the rock shrimp fishery and how you saw it develop and how it's changed over time.
Well, I appreciate the soapbox, Chip. It's one of the things I like to do. So thanks for that. It looks like I wore everybody else out, but thanks to everybody for attending and listening to me. I had a great time. I hope you did too. Thank you very much.
All right, and next month, November 14th, we're going to be having a seminar series on the Marine Recreational Information Program, talking about the new pilot study that had discovered potential bias in the FE, or Fishery Effort Survey. So that's going to be a presentation by NOAA Fisheries. So look forward to seeing everyone next month, and have a great afternoon.